Welcome everyone to another episode of Price Targets with your host Bitcoin Jack. It's been another week, so time for another video. I've been thinking about it for a while whether I should do one or not, because let's be honest, price hasn't moved much. So in that regard, I've initially thought I can cram this video up with a lot of nonsense, and then at second thought I was thinking about how I can actually do a little video and maybe explaining a few time pivots that I'm looking at that might become valuable in the current structure. Other than that, I want to thank you for subscribing, because we hit over 1k subscribers last week. That's pretty cool. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. We can look at Bitcoin first. Obviously, there's not much to show. On the daily, we've been ranging literally at a level where I think we were a few weeks ago, when I recorded my first video. Yeah, July 1st was my first video. So as you can see, not much has happened. It's just here, not doing much. It went up a little bit, it went down a little bit. We talked about last week how there was a shift in behavior, which, I mean, remains to be seen whether that's really the case or not, but there has been some kind of change where we said, okay, Bitcoin was kind of forming these dumps, a range, nuked the high of the range, nuked through the range, the previous range, formed a new range, kind of did the same trick again, ran the high, nuked through the range, like that, and then it just built another range, and it kind of went for the highs too, but then it kind of got stuck on the top of that for a few days, which kind of broke this pretty immediate aggressive sell-off that we saw earlier. Last week I was kind of like hoping that we would gain this and kind of hold it, retest it. We didn't. So at this point, I'm not really sure whether I can make any sensible comment on that. Other than that, there's not much to say. I do think that if this range is going to be dingle dangle doink 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 towards blue again, I'm going to agree that it looks really shit. Like, at that point, I'm not sure what to tell you, but I do think that I don't want to be a buyer here anymore. It's been tested a few times, actually so many times that, you know, I want to see strength coming off the level, and at least like claim the mid of the range right there. So until that happens, I don't think there's very much I can say. But if we don't doink there, which to be fair, we might just doink there pretty soon, then I do think that we're still good to go. And we're going to be talking about this from a different perspective a little bit in a little moment, because I have a few time pivots that we can talk about. There's this little last candle before we kind of like ran the high. I do want to hold that. I think if we lose that, I'm just going to hedge. I think I'm going to hedge. I don't think there's any reason to remain in position at that point. That said, we can, you know, what do you want me to say about this? ETH BTC, last week we talked about how it was claiming this weekly level. I was excited about that. It's now retesting it on the weekly. Back then we didn't know whether it was going to close above this little range right here. It did. So who can hold that? If this is not going to break down, then I have to remain bullish and I will keep on to my position. If it's going to lose it, obviously there's a reason to sell, I think. But I'm not really sure based on this chart where to be a buyer. I'd be a buyer if price comes back here. But I'm not really sure if it's going to get there but anywhere in between is a pretty empty space, like price kind of traded through it. There's no real levels, there's no nothing. So please, Ethereum, just hold it, because you make a lot more sense when you do so. We could arguably look at the ETH-USD pair. I think it's more clear where that would be ending up, or where I'd be a buyer again. So in case I kind of like lose and ditch my ETH position, then I'm going to be looking at the ETH-USD pair initially, because it just makes a lot more sense. There's a lot more data to go off by, and there's a lot more levels. We can see here that ETH was in this like over-under pattern, kind of like reclaimed the over part, right there, and it's now acting as support. So ETH BTC remains bullish as long as the support holds. If it loses it, I'm not going to be a seller specifically based off this, because I'm going to be a seller specifically based on what ETH BTC is doing. But if there is a decent setup that pops up on ETH-USD, which we don't know now yet, then obviously this chart could give us an opportunity to sell, perhaps. But in terms of where I'd be interested to be a buyer again, it would be these 2 wicks right there. There's some nice, I'm 100% sure there's stops there. So kind of like taking out this level and kind of like reclaiming it, that would be, I think, a decent risk-defined long opportunity to at least trade back to the range high at red. And obviously at that point, I'd be hoping that it's actually going to see the breakout of the descending broadening wedge if we do lose the support of red that we're at right now. So again, I can't update much right here. We can probably look at the daily, which still remains to be looking decent in my opinion. There's a, kind of a higher low right here. It's retesting support. It's a pretty clean test so far. We can grab this area right here, and it's testing this little expansion point. So that's something I really like to see, and it needs to hold. Other than that, if it does lose it, then let's see. I mean, yeah, I do think that if we kind of like lose this, if we close below there on the daily, I'm gonna reduce my position, perhaps. But like I said, I think I want to go off the ETH BTC chart, as it might actually be a better leading indicator in this case. So I think that's the update. We're at 8 minutes. Jeez, I mean, I think I've proven I can talk nonsense or something with that price action going on. Let's talk about what's currently happening in terms of time pivots. So if we consider this to be a giant consolidation, a corrective structure in a bullish impulse, so basically there's wave 1 here, and then there's some kind of corrective structure, and then this is wave 3. Then this is a giant, I think it's almost 80 days of corrective structure that needs to fit some kind of Elliott wave corrective structure. Let's see. This is, yeah, 78 days. So that's nearly 80 days. That's quite impressive. I've literally nothing. When I look at this, I do define this region right here as an A wave, and then this region right here. So let me just kind of make that clear. So region wave of wave A, region of wave B, and then some kind of C structure right here. And the beauty of it right now is that we can actually find the Fibonacci, the golden ratio. It's right there. If we multiply A by 1.618, we get 1.618. So the total of the two is 1. I think this one doesn't fit 100% with this one, but close enough. Look, this defines the pivot level of wave A into the start of wave B, and then we can do this again, where we grab the fib time, put it on this pivot right here, put the 0.318 at the pivot high right there, and then we get this specific little candle right here. And off this level, we saw a tiny expansion to go above the trend line right there. And what these pivots kind of insinuate, you'll oftentimes find certain extensions using the golden ratio. It doesn't have to be 1.618. It can be multiples of that, obviously, but often they signal a change in behavior. And it's kind of funny that it kind of lines up with where we were talking about last week about how there was a change in behavior, and that we're actually from, again, / Elliott wave / time pivot perspective are seeing the same thing being suggested. It's not 100% accurate all the time, but what it does give us is you know, we visually saw a change in behavior. We then have this math which kind of confirms it. So it's just a bit of confluence. The only thing, and let me grab another chart, is the C wave is kind of like blurry on BitMEX. But if we kind of consider the fact that BitMEX is the only exchange that had a wick all the way to 8600 right here, then it kind of does fit some kind of falling wedge pattern, which we broke out of and are hugging and retesting right now, which is not necessarily the most bullish thing that I want to see, but it's also not necessarily the most bearish thing you can see. So, you know, if you consider that we're still at support right there that we talked about earlier, then I do think, you know, this is really where we start where we need to start to take off. If we kind of like follow this too long, it's probably gonna, it's just, you know, like if we're gonna hog this, it's obviously it's gonna fall back into it, and then I do think that we're just gonna puke. I don't think I have any interest in being a buyer right there. Probably get a short for the time being, at least to cover some losses in case that we dump. And then I don't know, I think 7,500 is a really nice level. So I think that's it. 30 minutes. That's actually a lot more than I thought I would be able to fill. I recorded another video. I didn't really like the sound too much, so I decided not to release it. There was this whole thing where I was talking about why Bitcoin could be bullish, blah blah blah. Wait, I do have one more thing. This is the reason to be macro bullish on Bitcoin. I think I've made this chart in 100 different ways, but never managed to get it as clean as this one. But obviously what you can see on this chart is that Bitcoin has this 4-year cycle up until now, so it might break, who knows, but kind of like a parabolic rally into a blow off top, kind of forms a range, sees a capitulation, and then continuation up and around the halving. So this is literally, if we continue and repeat history, this is a really good reason to be bullish. On the other hand, you know, we don't know whether this is going to repeat. This is just 2 instances where it happened. It kind of looks the same. It kind of feels the same. I don't know whether it's going to be the same, but we can definitely, I think we should or could or maybe have a discussion about it, but I do think there's this inflationary environment we're in, and gold's annual inflation as it stands after the halving is actually higher than Bitcoin's annual inflation. So in an inflationary environment, I think Bitcoin is going to be a hedge. It's got to the point where access to bigger entities is available widely, regulated, everything. There's custody. You can buy it pretty much everywhere in the world. So it kind of makes sense that people will use it, and given the smaller market cap, I do think there's a lot more stretch in its price. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe it turns out like shit. Maybe we just, become very bearish. But I don't see it happen. There's so many different angles that make Bitcoin bullish. Doesn't mean that we might not see a correction. We might see a correction. But bigger picture, which is this chart. This chart is not speculating on whether we see a 40% drawdown or a 20% drawdown. So I'd say that we're going to finish off and hopefully have some more volatility next week. And stay safe out there. I guess it's costing a lot of patience. And see you next week.